Alright, so today we are going to be talking about another cameo for Shang Tsung, and this time it is Stryker. So, the moves that Stryker can offer Shang Tsung are pretty decent. They're probably not the be-all end-all, and he's definitely not Shang Tsung's best choice in my opinion, but he does open up some options, and lets us play Shang in a way that's a little different than we might normally play him. So we're going to go over each of his moves and how they integrate into his game plan. So the first one we're going to talk about is Cuffed, because I think this is his least used move, and probably for good reason. But it does have uses. So, Cuffed is his down cameo. He comes out, puts you in cuffs, and you get 35 hit advantage. This move is a restand, and jails for a nice long time, 30 frames no matter what. So, you can see, even in the middle of a combo, it jails them for 35 frames, puts a set of spacing where we could come in. You can dash up and do almost anything you want with 35 frames. You can do a mid, you can do an overhead, you can do a low, you can do a throw. Although if you throw while he's actually in his jailed frames, then it will not connect. As you can see by my demonstration right there. But you can do highs, you can do anything you could normally do while your opponent is jailed. And it hits from anywhere on the screen. So wherever on the screen Liu Kang is, Stryker's going to come from behind and grab him. It is not a grab, it is just a... It is a high, in fact. Your opponent can crouch it. So, go like that, and it just whiffs. In fact, even if your opponent is crouch blocking, it won't connect at all. So, you gotta be real careful when you throw this move out in the neutral. This is especially true because it is negative 12, and if you use it at the end of a block string or something like that, you're punishable. So you don't want to just be tossing it out willy-nilly. You want to do it if your opponent is going to get hit. Now, the real application that it has for Shang Tsung is that because it is full screen, and it is not a projectile, we can use it to break projectile immune moves. For example, we're going to use Sub-Zero's Ice Armor. Say that. Now, as you can see, during Ice Armor, your opponent can actually block. So, it's an ambush, and your opponent can block while they get the Ice Armor put on them. And then Stryker will hit the block, or they could just crouch. And same thing. But if the Ice Armor is on them, and then Stryker comes out, he will break it, and we'll be back to zoning. We can basically just trade cameo charges. This works particularly well on something like Tremor Reflect, or on Viltrumite Stance. It does beat EX Viltrumite Stance as well. It is very bad against something like Kenshi's Charge, because this move has terrible tracking. You can show that our opponent wants to just dash up after we use a projectile. That there is nothing we can do about that with Stryker. He just whiffs. And in fact, our opponent has time to do something like this. We see the Ice Coat come on. Now, if you have incredible reaction, you can catch them while they're standing, but they could still be blocking or crouching. And if we wait until we actually see the Ice Coat on, sometimes Stryker is going to hit the cameo, but as long as your opponent is dashing forward, there is no way he is going to catch them. It has terrible, terrible tracking. Even if you're this close, watch armor come out, he's dashing, no way. So, this is something that you're really only doing as a read to beat projectile immunity. You're doing this if you are pretty certain that your opponent is going to use a projectile immune move, and you don't want to see that happen. But if it doesn't work, you're in a really bad situation, and if your opponent just crouches to avoid your triple skulls like they normally do, they're going to dodge this too. Or if they dash forward after getting their ice armor on, which is what they normally do, it's not going to work. If they throw their own projectile, then we're in good shape. If he goes ice armor, projectile. Armor, projectile. There we go. And that's the way he wants to beat my zoning. Then we're going to have it. My inputs get read properly. There we go. He tries to throw. We hit him. So, there are some scenarios in which it works out reasonably well. But it is limited. Let's see if it even hits them when they try to low profile. Wow, that one actually, Stryker got hit? Is that what happened? Okay. If they're doing a low profile move, you might hit them anyway. Something like that low fireball. Yeah, in that case, he just hit the Kameo and took off. He whiffed on Liu Kang entirely. So this is a very questionable move for breaking armor. But as a jailing technique, it also has some issues. Because it is so slow, only on strings like that are we going to be able to actually catch them. I think it is technically possible, if you time it perfectly, to catch him off of your knee instead. Which results in a pretty decent combo that just has a restand at the end. If Stryker will come out properly on not pressing grenades. Yeah, you can technically do it at that point if you're able to time it almost frame perfect to get Stryker to grab after the knee. But most of the time, when you're in online lag, something like that, you're not going to want to try to do this frame perfect, and you are going to be trying to get Stryker to come after one of these kicks. And you're going to end up with much lower combo damage than you normally would. Down from 388 to 296, we're losing almost 10% of the damage to get this 35 frame restand. So if you're very confident you can hit your opponent again, then it's good. If you think it might be a struggle to hit your opponent again, then the restand's probably not worth it. And that's pretty much all there is to be said about Cuffed. It is not a fantastic move. It's basically just a read to breach projectile immunity, and that's the only way that Shang Tsung utilizes it well. Because it's slow, and it has bad tracking, and it just guts your combo damage. But it does hit anywhere if your opponent's going to stand still for a second. The next move I'm going to go over with Stryker is Lethal Takedown and Cop Bop, which are both basically the same move. One's a high, one's an overhead, and the other one's a low. But they're the same idea. They are both plus on block, and they're a mix-up, and they are summons. So, just like Cuffed, Shang Tsung cannot move around while Cuffed is active. Same thing with Cop Bop and Lethal Takedown. That's Lethal Takedown. That's Cop Bop. Now, these are a way for you to make your block strings contain mix-ups. Shang Tsung doesn't have mix-ups normally. Now we have an overhead there. Now we have a low there. And you can put this overhead or this low at any point in a string that is special cancelable. So, you can say, you know what? Now, it's only after the third hit. Because you want to stagger your opponent in some weird way. Or get them to... Or if you're worried that they're going to armor, you can do it early so that their armor will not come out. And the Cop Bop, the overhead, ends at +6 on block, which means that this 13 frame mid that you use can only be beaten by 6 frame moves and trade with 7 frame moves. Most people have 7 frame down ones or standing ones, so you'll trade with those if you try to go for your mid, or you will get beaten by a 6 frame jab or like Liu Kang's 6 frame high punch. And other than that, you can always secure a jab, and if your opponent is respecting you, you can go for the low, or you can go for the overhead. And of course, because you can go into your mid most of the time, you can just lead into more mix-ups. The other way that you can get tricky with this is to use Shang's bed of spikes. Like that. Because that move is a low and comes out in 8 frames. And Stryker has an overhead that comes out in 22. Or a low that comes out in 26. So, if your opponent thinks Stryker is coming, they can fuzzy guard. And they start high and then go low in order to block the overhead and then the low. If they're afraid of bed of spikes, then they will have to block low, then high, then low again. And when you call bed of spikes, you can summon Stryker grenades to accompany it and make yourself plus off of the bed of spikes, which means that you can always have that siren going off in the background, and your opponent is always going to think that a Stryker mix-up is coming. And in a way, it is. So this can leave Shang Tsung with a pretty decent mix-up plan. Now, bed of spikes is negative 28 on block by itself. And with the grenades, it becomes plus, but we're at a range that isn't amazing. You probably should just start firing skulls from this range. But it does force your opponent to respect some of the skulls and maybe get hit by the low. And then you can decide to mix it up later by going for the overhead here. Or going for Stryker's low. And Stryker's overhead and Stryker's low deal okay damage when they hit that. And they leave you with lots of plus frames. 54 off the low. And 32 off the overhead. So you can do whatever you want on Oki. Your opponent has to respect you or try to armor. And your overhead does 60 damage. And your low also does 60 damage. So this is a good way to start eating away at people with mix-ups from Shang. And when you combine it with what the grenade toss can help you do, you can end up with a pretty dangerous chip damage mix-up block string pressure version of Shang Tsung that is not normally what you would do. There are lots of cameos that can let you get pressure and chip damage, but Stryker's the only one that really gives you mix-ups along with the pressure and chip damage. So, basically, Lethal Takedown and Cop Bob do what they say on the tin. They're also invulnerable wake-ups. And they're pretty good invulnerable wake-ups, as we'll show you presently. Look at that. Liu Kang's mid doesn't do it. Let's see about the Cop Bob. Same deal. So, when you use these as a wake-up, it does change their properties on block. They become negative. As you can probably imagine, because this is a universal thing about wake-ups, the overhead is now negative 14 on wake-up. And below, sorry about that. Below, The low is negative 16. So they go from plus on block to dangerous on block when used as a wake-up. The on block normally, overhead's plus 6. And the low is plus 1. So the low just leads into the jab. The overhead's a little bit trickier. And Stryker's final moves are his grenade toss, his low and high. They both pretty much do the same thing. But here's the low. Here's the high. Both of those hit mid. They may not look like it, but they do. The real reason that the high is a high is because it covers jumping. Where the lows, really just hitting mid-screen. You'll see that neither of these actually reach full screen, which is a little bit of a problem for the zoning game that Shang likes to maintain. Doing something like that, your opponent could dash forward. The problem is, the grenades do interfere with dashing. So, when timed properly, if your opponent tries to dash out of your pressure here, they'll get hit by the grenades, and then the pushback from the grenades will push them back into the skull, and they'll get full comboed. The timing on this is a little bit precise. You actually time Stryker much later than you time other projectiles that you want your opponents to respect during Shang's projectiles. But you're basically doing the same thing you might do with somebody like Sector or Kameo, throwing them out alongside your skulls to force your opponent to block, and particularly block the ground skull. And if they fail to block the ground skull, get comboed. So, one nice thing about the grenades at this distance is they do prevent jumping. If your opponent tries to jump out of that, they are getting hit for sure. And if they get hit while trying to jump, the ground skull will definitely hit them, and it will be very easy to hit confirm into a full combo. However, this doesn't actually deal chip damage from out here, and if your opponent just wants to sit and crouch, they can just sit and crouch, and then when you turn old, they can block. Because there is nothing that they need to actually block while you're young Shang. So you definitely don't have the same kind of zoning game that you might be hoping for. If you want people to block you, you have to amplify your projectiles, and actually at full screen, that doesn't matter either. Shang Tsung's amplified projectiles are not mids from full screen. As you can see, he just crouched. So, if you want your opponents to respect you at full screen, you have to turn old, and once you turn old, it's a dead giveaway that they just block and then move in. So, your zoning capabilities are not going to shine when Stryker is your teammate. But that is not the only application that the grenades have. The grenades are also good up close. The grenades can be used to make pressure. Something like that. As you can see, you can deal good chip damage, and you can force your opponent to respect your pressure. And if the Stryker grenades are a little bit late, that's okay, because if your opponent hits you and starts to combo you, they will get hit by the grenade anyway, because it is unlikely they will be able to hit Stryker because he's so far behind you. So a block string like that is doing a good chunk of chip damage. It is nothing to laugh at, and is definitely one of the things that Shang can be good at. And once you factor in the fact that you could start putting in mix-ups and different enders, you end up with an actually really dangerous pressure game that Shang Tsung normally has the chip damage, normally has the opportunities for you to mess up because of a long block string, but normally, if you know to block, you've pretty much solved it. Doesn't matter how you block, just block. But now we have the throws, we have the overheads, we have the lows, and we have them from a lot of angles. You don't have to just use Stryker's overhead and low here. If you use his pressure right there, you can do Shang's overhead. and you can do Shang's low. So you can keep your opponent never knowing what angle they're going to get hit from next. Go throw this time, and then throw set up down threes for Shang Tsung into more pressure. So this is kind of the way you need to play if you're going to use Stryker. You need to get up close, use a lot of crazy mix-ups, embrace that you're probably only going to get one hit off of your mix-ups, and you're going to get a lot of chip damage, and that your plan is to wear your opponent down with block pressure that they don't know how to get out of. And even in some cases, because there are two grenades, if an opponent has the wrong kind of armored move, if it's something that kind of goes up into the air a little bit, or they're just spaced in the wrong way, the grenades can actually break armor. Like, try to find a spacing where both grenades hit. It's a little bit rough. But it is possible for both grenades to hit, depending on the move that's coming out of Shang at the time that the grenades go off. And of course, if you think your opponent is going to armor, this move hits a lot of times, and if you EX it, it has armor. So, if you're worried your opponent is going to armor right here, you do this, and their armor is gonna backfire. So even when they think they've beat the mix-up, they haven't beat the mix-up. Another thing that the grenade toss can do is create form stealer combos. You actually use the far grenade toss for this, because it hits a little higher. Yeah, just like that. You can do this with any character, and it's pretty easy to do. And once you nail down the timing just a little bit, it is pretty intuitive. You don't have to hit it mad early like you do with Sector Missile, and you don't have to hit it in a very specific spacing like you do with Kano. You don't need really specific timing like you do with Kano to hit one knife instead of both. And you don't need to be really quick on your feet as your opponent like you do with Goro. So it might not be the easiest form steal in the entire world. It doesn't exactly freeze your opponent, and your combo options will be limited with some characters after the hit, but not any more limited than somebody like Kano or Sector. So you have access to real form stealer combos in the same way they do. Another major problem with Stryker and his grenades at full screen is that if your opponent is doing Sub-Zero armor, there's nothing you can do about this. Everything in your kit is a projectile, and this is just, it's done. Your opponent doesn't have to block, they don't have to do anything, they can just advance on you. So, again, this is another way in which the zoning is just a very weak plan when you have this version of Shang. As you can see, Stryker grenades not doing the trick. So it has a weird presence from full screen. It's something that kind of works. It might catch your opponent out once or twice if they don't realize that they need to be patient and wait for the ground skull to come out. But they can really just crouch most of your stuff, block the ground skull, advance, and that's all they have to do. And if they have projectile immunity, they don't have to do that. They can just advance. Fearless. So, if you're going to play Shang with Stryker, what you have to do is turn him into a pressure monster with a lot of mix-ups. And you need to make your opponent afraid that every time you start a melee string, they can't do anything. Once they start trying to armor, you start spinning spikes. If they start trying to jab, you make sure you keep coming in with the mid. If they're blocking consistently, you come in with a throw. If they are blocking low all the time, you come in with the overhead. If they block that overhead, instead you come in with this one. If they block that one, you come in with the low. And they're never going to know if that Stryker call is grenades for more pressure or a mix-up. And it could be both. You could do spikes with grenades and start firing skulls. So the biggest advantage that you're really going to get with all of these mix-ups and pressure is that it is very easy to use all of the features of Stryker on any character. So when you transform into your opponent, you can apply all of your opponent's mix-ups and pressure, and you still get a lot of the same mix-ups and pressure from Stryker, but you now also have access to your opponent's kit, so you might have a better mix-up. If you're fighting somebody like Melina, you just went from mostly lows from Shang to mostly overheads from Melina, but Stryker can still switch it up either way, and you still have the grenade pressure, and you still have the cop bop and lethal takedown. So if you're particularly proficient at playing your opponent's characters, and you want to play a really aggressive, in-your-face version of Shang, I think Stryker's the answer. If you want to lean into what is traditionally Shang's strength, which is zoning, and what I think this game wants you to do with Shang, which is zoning, then I don't think Stryker's the answer. But if you're just enthused with the idea that you can steal your opponent's soul and have high chip damage, then this is a fantastic loadout for him. Anyway, that's the video. That's my thoughts on Stryker as a teammate for Shang Tsung. If you could give me a like, a comment, a subscribe, a pound of flesh, your inheritance, your firstborn child, the deed to your home, and your car title, that'd be great. See you in the next one.